Vice Chair Thomas, Ranking Member Humphrey, members of the committee. My name is Ed Mulholland. I'm from Zanesville, Ohio, House District 97. I'm a volunteer with Convention of States Action, and we seek your support of HJR 3 to address runaway overreach of the federal government. The Declaration of Independence was an announcement to the world that the colonists could and would manage their own affairs. It was a statement establishing the right of individual liberty and local sovereignty. The Constitution followed, securing the liberty of the people while granting the federal government only 27 enumerated powers. Later, the Bill of Rights reinforced, the 10th Amendment reinforced the limits on federal power. James Madison, an author of the Constitution and fourth President of the United States, put it this way: the powers delegated by the Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those of state governments are numerous and indefinite. By dividing power between the federal and state governments, the framers built a safeguard into our political system to restrain federal overreach. This division of power is called federalism, and sadly, it's been dying a slow death for decades. The death of federalism has led to a concentration of power at the federal level. As the power of the federal government expands, so expands the necessary regulation and control that steals the very liberties the government is supposed to protect. Why is federalism on its deathbed? Prior to the New Deal era, local economic activities such as labor, manufacturing, agriculture, mining were widely understood to be under the purview of state governments. They were not considered part of interstate commerce. Then, Supreme Court decisions like upholding the National Labor Relations Act in 1937 and Wickard v. Filburn in 1942 dramatically changed the interpretation of the Constitution's Commerce Clause, enlarging the federal government's lawmaking authority at the expense of state sovereignty. With its new expanded authority, the government grew so much, Congress was forced to defer a great deal of authority to newly created agencies, and today the number of statutes passed by our elected representatives in Congress is dwarfed by the number of regulations created by federal agencies staffed by unelected bureaucrats. The Supreme Court's arbitrary reinterpretation of the Commerce Clause can be corrected with an amendment to the Constitution. Doing so will rightly shift power out of Washington, D.C. and back to the states where it belongs and where our country's founders intended it to be. This will help revive federalism and the balanced power between federal and state governments. Another contributor to the death of federalism was the United States v. Butler decision, heard about a little bit earlier, which reinterpreted the General Welfare Clause. Prior to this ruling, the General Welfare Clause was interpreted to mean that Congress could only spend money in service of its 27 enumerated powers. It could not spend money on activities states could spend money on. For example, states can spend money on education, welfare, medical, and retirement programs. Accordingly, Congress had no jurisdiction for such programs. However, after this Supreme Court ruling, the floodgates were opened and Congress was permitted to spend money on essentially anything it wanted. This Supreme Court reinterpretation of General Welfare Clause can also be corrected through an amendment to the Constitution that clarifies the clause according to the framers' intentions. Pandora's box of federal government expansion can, in fact, be closed with such an amendment. Now, some of you might be wondering, what would happen to federal programs Americans have come to rely upon, like Social Security? Those programs don't have to end. Their administration could shift from federal government to state governments. The programs could be more closely tailored to the particular needs of each state. As our elected officials, you would be in control. And we all know states tend to be more efficient with their resources and more responsive to their citizens' needs. In summary, federalism is all but dead in our country due to an ever-expanding federal government that treats states as federal agencies. This is a dangerous slide toward the concentration of absolute power at the federal level, concentrated power that always leads to tyranny and loss of individual liberty. This imbalance of power is a result of Supreme Court decisions that reinterpreted the Constitution, taking power from states and giving it to the federal government. To preserve state sovereignty and the liberties of the people, we must restore federalism. HJR 3 calls for a convention to give states the opportunity to at least discuss this important issue. I urge you to support HJR 3.